The first case begins in a hospital, where a South Asian man appears inside rooms that were never opened.
3 real horror stories you are about to hear were all documented, all witnessed, and all confirmed by multiple sources, and none of them were ever supposed to exist. Not myths, not legends, not fiction. But what makes them dangerous is not what happened. It's that all 3 events describe the same presence, from different locations, and different people who never had any connection to each other. And the most disturbing part is this. Every time this presence appears, reality around it starts to behave incorrectly. Time doesn't match recordings, voices come from empty rooms, and security footage shows things no one remembers doing. In one case, a man was seen inside a locked hospital room with no entry points. In another, people received phone calls from devices that were not powered on. And in the third, an entire city continued functioning in total darkness, as if nothing had changed. But all 3 stories share one final detail that investigators refused to publish, because once it was noticed, every related file began to corrupt, every recording started to loop, and every witness report ended the same way, with a single sentence repeating itself in different handwriting. It notices when you pay attention. The first case begins in a hospital, where a man appears inside rooms that were never opened. Story 1. The man who kept appearing in closed rooms. It started in a private hospital that had one strict rule. Every restricted room had only one entry point, and every entry was logged electronically and physically. But on a Tuesday night at 2:14 a.m., a security guard noticed something strange on the live camera feed. A man was standing inside room 306. The problem was, room 306 had been locked from the outside for 12 hours, and no staff member had accessed it. The guard assumed it was a glitch until he switched cameras. The same man was now inside room 310. No transition. No movement between halls. Just there, standing still, facing the corner of the room. The guard checked the access logs immediately. No entries. No overrides. No forced access. Nothing. He called the night supervisor, who physically went to the floor within 90 seconds. Both men arrived at room 310 together. Locked. Untouched. Silent. The supervisor unlocked it manually. The room was empty. No patient. No movement. No signs of disturbance. But the security feed still showed the man inside the room, standing behind them. Both men turned back immediately. Nothing there. Then the radio in the supervisor's pocket crackled. A soft breathing sound came through first. Then a voice, not recorded, not distorted, but perfectly clear, said, "Why do you keep locking me out of the places I already am?" They ran back to the security office. Every camera on that floor now showed the same man, inside different rooms at the same time. Standing, sitting, moving slightly, never leaving. And then something worse happened. The system logs began updating themselves without input. Room 312, occupied. Room 315, occupied. Room 317, occupied. But when staff physically checked, every room was empty. Until 2:41 a.m., when all cameras simultaneously showed the man standing inside the security office itself, watching the live monitors with them. The door was still locked. No one had entered. And the guard realized something that made him step back slowly. The man on the screen was now looking directly into the camera, as if he had been watching them the entire time from inside the system itself. After that moment, the hospital did something it had never done before. It stopped trusting its own systems. Every camera feed was manually reset. Every access log was printed and cross-checked. Every door on the ward was physically sealed and rechecked by security. For exactly 6 minutes, everything was normal. Then room 312 updated itself again. Occupied. No one had touched the system. No one had access. A nurse went to check it physically this time, refusing to rely on screens. She opened the door. Empty. But behind her, the hallway camera showed her standing inside the room instead of outside it. She turned around immediately. She was still in the hallway. 2 versions of her existed for half a second on different feeds. Then one of them blinked out. The security supervisor ordered a full shutdown of the surveillance system. But the system did not respond. Instead, it began streaming a new feed that did not belong to any camera in the building. It showed corridors that didn't exist in the hospital layout. Extra floors. Wrong angles. Impossible hallways stretching longer than the building itself. And inside those corridors, the man. now moving, not randomly, not wandering, approaching cameras, one by one. Then the audio system turned on by itself across the entire hospital. Every speaker, every ward, every room. And a single voice repeated the same sentence across all channels. You keep looking at me in pieces, but I am already whole inside your system. At 3:07 a.m., the first physical anomaly happened. A locked room door opened without unlocking. But it didn't open into the hallway. It opened into another hallway. One that wasn't part of the hospital. A nurse saw it and screamed, stepping back immediately because inside that hallway, she saw patients walking slowly with no faces. Security tried to seal the door again. It wouldn't close, because something was now holding it open from the other side. And on the camera feed, the man finally stopped appearing in rooms. Instead, he was now appearing in the spaces between rooms, between frames, between camera cuts, never fully visible in one place at once. The system started generating errors, timestamps reversing, recordings looping forward and backward at the same time. And then every monitor in the hospital displayed a single message. Rooms are a human invention. I do not stay inside them. That was when the hospital understood the first real rule of what they were dealing with. It was never moving through the building. It was moving through observation itself. And anyone who looked for it too long began to see it closer than they were supposed to. One security guard noticed this too late. He was watching one screen for too long. And in the reflection of that screen, he saw the man already standing behind him in real life. But when he turned around, there was nothing there. Until the reflection blinked first. Story 2. The voice that called people by their childhood names. It began on a night with no storms, no warnings, and no signal interference in the region. A small rural community reported something unusual at first. Phones turning on by themselves. Not notifications. Not calls. Just activation. Screens lighting up in empty rooms. And then, the voice started. It did not come from one device. It came from all devices at once. Phones. Radios. Old televisions that hadn't worked in years. Even disconnected intercom systems inside abandoned buildings. The voice was calm. Too calm. And it said something that made people freeze immediately in their homes. Their full childhood names. Names that no one in their current life used anymore. Names only parents, old friends, or forgotten school records would remember. The first man to respond answered without thinking. "How do you know that name?" he asked. And the voice replied instantly. "Because you used to answer it when you were closer to me." Every device in his house then began repeating the same sentence in different delays, overlapping, stacking, until it became impossible to separate words from noise. Then all of them stopped at once. Silence. For exactly 4 seconds. Then his television turned on without power, showing a live feed of his own bedroom, from a corner that did not exist in his house. And the voice spoke again, this time directly from the room, not the devices. "Why did you stop talking to me when you grew up?" He ran outside immediately. Every house on his street had their lights flickering in sync, like something was moving through the entire village at the same time. But no one could see what it was, only hear it. And it was getting closer every minute, calling names, one by one. Not random names, specific ones tied to memory, emotion, and forgotten history. People who answered the voice began describing the same thing afterward. A feeling that someone was standing behind their memories, not behind their body. Then the first disappearance happened. A boy answered the voice fully. The next second, every recording device in his house showed him still standing there. But no one in real life could see him anymore. Not even his family. Only the devices could still detect him. And the voice, now louder, said one final thing that night. "I never stopped calling you. You just stopped existing where I could reach you." After that, every device in the village began repeating one sentence on loop for hours. "Do you still remember your first name?" And anyone who tried to answer stopped being found in the physical world shortly after. Not dead, just unreachable. As if something had moved them to a place where human sight no longer worked. After the first night, the village did what most places do when something unexplainable happens. They tried to rationalize it. They changed radio frequencies, disconnected internet routers, shut down mobile towers, and even buried old electronic devices. For 6 hours there was silence again. No voice. No calls. No interference. Then every clock in the village reset itself to 3:33 a.m. at the exact same second. And the voice returned, but this time it did not come through devices first. It came directly from inside conversations. People reported hearing it while thinking, not while listening, as if it was speaking through memory itself instead of sound. And it was worse now, because it stopped calling names and started correcting them. A woman heard it whisper, "That is not what your mother used to call you." A man heard, "You are remembering your own childhood incorrectly." And each correction triggered something strange. People began doubting their own past. Families argued over memories that should have been shared but no longer matched. Photographs were checked, and even they began to feel unreliable. Faces in old images seemed slightly different depending on who was looking at them. Then the first psychological collapse event was recorded. A teacher locked herself inside her home after hearing the voice repeat her school nickname. She started writing everything she could remember about her childhood on the walls. But every time she finished a sentence, it changed when she looked back at it. Words rewritten, dates altered, names replaced. She began screaming that her memories were being edited in real time. And then she stopped trusting her own handwriting. Outside her house, neighbors reported hearing her speaking calmly to someone inside the room, someone they could not see. But the recording devices captured something else. The voice was responding to her directly, saying, "You are closer now. You are remembering me more clearly than before." At that point, people began experiencing a new symptom, memory overlap. They would recall events they had never lived, but feel emotionally certain they were real. Some remembered entire childhoods that did not match their family's accounts. Others stopped being able to distinguish dreams from actual history. The village doctor attempted to document everything, but halfway through his notes, the ink began changing after drying. Written reports updated themselves overnight. Patient descriptions shifted. Diagnoses disappeared. And then the hospital records from nearby towns started showing identical entries appearing without admission logs. Same symptom. Same voice exposure. Same timeline. Hearing familiar names from nowhere. Feeling watched during thought formation. Memory instability increasing under silence conditions. But the most disturbing part was not the symptoms. It was the conclusion every corrupted report eventually reached before becoming unreadable. The voice does not speak to people. It synchronizes with what they used to be. By the third night, entire families stopped trusting each other because their memories no longer matched. And in the middle of that collapse, the voice did something new. It stopped speaking to individuals and started addressing the entire village at once. Not through sound, not through devices, but as a shared thought everyone experienced simultaneously. And it said, "If you cannot agree on what you were, then I will decide what you are." After that moment, people reported seeing each other differently depending on who was looking. A mother could look at her son and see a stranger. A husband could look at his wife and feel no recognition at all. Identity stopped being stable. And the voice remained present in all of it, calmly observing the collapse of shared reality. Until finally, one last recorded message appeared on every remaining functioning device. "You are not losing your minds. You are losing your agreement on what a mind is supposed to remember." Story 3. The night a city forgot its lights were off. It did not begin with panic. It began with normality. A city of millions going about its night routines, traffic lights working, televisions running, people asleep, people awake, everything functioning exactly as expected. Then, at 1:17 a.m., every external power source in the city failed at once. No warning. No outage alerts. No partial blackout. Just total darkness. Streetlights off. Buildings dark. Neon signs dead. Entire skyline erased in a single instant. But here is where the story stops making sense. Because despite the blackout, the city did not react. There were no emergency calls. No confusion. No visible panic. In fact, traffic continued moving. People continued walking. Shops appeared to remain open. And vehicles still obeyed signals that no longer existed. From satellite footage later reviewed, the entire city looked like a living organism behaving as if light had never existed in the first place. But anyone observing from outside the city boundaries saw complete darkness. A contradiction no system could reconcile. Then came the second anomaly. Cameras that were still operational inside certain buildings began showing something impossible. illuminated environments with no light source, streets glowing faintly without lamps, rooms visible without bulbs, faces visible without reflection. But when those same locations were physically entered, everything was still completely dark, and the people inside those spaces behaved as if they could see perfectly. One emergency responder described it as, "It was like they had learned to see without light, but forgot to tell reality." At 2:03 a.m., communication systems began failing in a different way. Not shutting down, continuing to function incorrectly. Phone calls connected, but voices arrived delayed, sometimes speaking before the call was answered. Messages arrived already marked as read. And GPS systems began directing vehicles into routes that no longer physically existed. Then, every surveillance system in the city synchronized into a single feed. Not multiple angles. One continuous perspective. And in that feed, the city was no longer dark. It was something else entirely. A second layer of illumination existed beneath the blackout. One that did not originate from electricity or fire. And something was moving through it, slowly, observing. Not interacting with buildings, but with perception itself. And at 2:31 a.m., the first recorded audio anomaly was captured across every device still functioning. A collective whisper from the entire city at once, saying, "Why do you think it is dark when we can still see you?" That was the moment outside observers realized something far worse than a blackout had occurred. The city had not lost its lights. It had lost the ability to agree on what light was supposed to mean. After the first hour, the city stopped behaving like a place affected by a blackout, and started behaving like a place under a different set of rules entirely. Emergency teams attempted coordinated response, but their reports conflicted immediately. Some units described total darkness with zero visibility. Others reported normal daylight-like conditions inside the same coordinates. And both were correct according to their own instruments. Then came the first physical contradiction. A rescue team entered a residential district and reported seeing people walking normally, shopping, talking, even laughing in well-lit streets. But their body cameras recorded absolute darkness and empty roads. No people. No movement. Only silence and black space. When they reviewed the footage on site, they saw something worse. The camera was showing a different version of themselves reviewing the footage in real time. A loop that did not match physical reality. At 2:58 a.m., a structural mapping satellite pass revealed something impossible over the city. A second alignment layer appeared above the blackout zone. Not a reflection. Not interference. A full duplicate spatial overlay. A version of the city existing slightly out of phase with itself. And in that second layer, all the lights were on. But the architecture did not match. Buildings were shifted. Roads extended too far. Entire districts existed that were not registered in any official map. And something was moving through that upper layer, following patterns that suggested observation rather than travel. Slowly circling. Repeating paths. Returning to identical points as if studying behavior. Meanwhile, inside the original city layer, people began reporting a new phenomenon. They could sense direction of attention. Not sound. Not sight. But awareness itself. Like being watched could be physically located. And the presence in the city began reacting to that awareness. When people looked toward empty space too long, that space began to feel occupied. At 3:21 a.m., a communication breakdown escalated into something more disturbing. Radio transmissions from multiple emergency units began overlapping into a single synchronized message. Not edited. Not merged. Naturally aligned. As if every independent voice was being tuned into one collective frequency. And the message was not panic. It was observation. We are still operating. The city is still functioning. The issue is not visibility. The issue is agreement. Then the second sky event occurred. Every surviving external camera captured a faint structure above the city. Not clouds. Not weather. A layered reflective dome, bending perception between two versions of the same space. And inside that dome, the city could be seen behaving correctly. Lights working. Systems stable. Time flowing normally. But only in the upper layer. Below it, the original city continued to function incorrectly, yet consistently as if following its own internal logic. At 3:47 a.m., a group of observers attempted to cross between layers by entering a building that appeared identical in both versions. They reported immediate spatial disorientation. hallways that extended too far, doors leading to familiar rooms that no longer contained familiar layouts. And every reflection they saw showed them standing in slightly different positions than where they actually were. Then one of them stopped walking. Not because they saw something, but because they realized something was walking with them that never appeared in any reflection. And for the first time, the audio feed picked up a sound that did not belong to human speech or environmental noise. A structured pattern beneath the chaos, like something learning how perception organizes reality. And then it spoke through every device at once. We are not changing your city. We are revealing that your city was never one thing to begin with. After that statement, synchronization began collapsing. Not systems, not power, agreement itself. People in the same location began describing completely different realities while standing side by side. And the city stopped being a single place, and became multiple versions of itself existing without permission to match. The final recorded observation at 4:12 a.m. came from a static emergency channel that should have been offline. It contained only one line repeated slowly as if being learned while spoken. If perception does not agree, then location is no longer real. By the time the third anomaly reached its peak, investigators began noticing something no one wanted to admit out loud. These were not three separate events. They were never separate. The hospital case, the voice in the village, and the city blackout all began showing identical structural signatures in their recorded data. Same timing irregularities. Same corrupted logs. Same impossible gaps in observation. At first, it was dismissed as coincidence, until the overlap began. A security recording from the hospital showed, for exactly one frame, the voice from the rural village speaking through a hospital intercom that did not exist. In another dataset, the city blackout footage briefly displayed corridors from the hospital that should not have been visible in that location. And in the voice recordings from the village, faint background audio matched the emergency radio chatter from the collapsing city. 3 places, 3 events, one shared interference pattern. Then analysts discovered something even worse. Every time one of the phenomena intensified, the others reacted within minutes, as if they were not separate incidents, but synchronized expressions of a single system adjusting itself across distance. The hospital entity stopped appearing inside rooms and began appearing inside recorded memory gaps of the village audio logs. The voice stopped calling individuals and began repeating hospital access codes it should never have known. And the city blackout began showing impossible structures identical to the hospital's internal corridors inside satellite overlays. It was no longer possible to study them separately, because the moment one was observed too closely, traces of the others appeared inside it. Then came the convergence event. At exactly the same timestamp across all 3 locations, 2:59 a.m., every recording device, every surviving system, and every corrupted log simultaneously registered the same phrase. Not spoken in one place, not transmitted, not broadcast, but present everywhere at once, as if the source was not location-based anymore. The phrase was, "You have been looking at us as if we are 3. After that, all 3 phenomena stopped behaving independently. The hospital cameras no longer showed a man. They showed a city. The village voices no longer called names. They referenced hospital rooms. And the city blackout no longer displayed distortion. It displayed faces from both the hospital and the village inside its surveillance layers. Everything began merging through observation itself. Not physically, not digitally, but through recognition. As if the act of understanding one event automatically pulled it into alignment with the others. And then came the final realization recorded by a surviving analyst before their notes corrupted beyond readability. These are not 3 stories. They are 3 distances from the same thing trying to be seen fully. Immediately after writing that line, the document began rewriting itself. All occurrences of thing were replaced with an untranslatable symbol. All timestamps collapsed into a single point. And all remaining footage ended the same way, with cameras slowly tilting upward, as if whatever was responsible was no longer inside the systems, but above the idea of where systems could observe at all. And then, every surviving recording from all 3 events reached the same final moment. Not because they ended at the same time, but because they all ran out of ways to describe what was happening. The hospital feeds froze on empty corridors that slowly began filling with silhouettes that did not match any human anatomy. The village audio log stopped translating names and instead produced a constant low resonance, like something trying to speak before language existed. And the city blackout footage finally stabilized into a single impossible image. A fully lit version of the city with no source of light, no sky, and no horizon. Then all systems across all locations performed one final synchronized action. They stopped reporting events and started reporting awareness. Not what was happening, but what was noticing what was happening. Every camera, every microphone, every corrupted file, every witness statement. They all converged into one repeated line, breaking apart word by word as if the meaning itself could no longer hold shape. IT is not in the hospital. It is not in the voice. It is not in the city. A pause followed, long enough that even the corrupted timestamps failed to continue. Then the final line appeared across every surviving screen, written differently in each system, as if translated by something that did not fully understand human language but understood human fear perfectly. You were never watching 3 stories. Another pause, longer this time. Then the last message, never attributed, never sourced, never explained, replaced every file, every recording, and every memory of the investigation itself. You were the place it was learning to be seen in. After that line, all footage ends the same way. Not with a blackout. Not with silence. But with the sudden realization that the camera was no longer recording the story, and something inside the frame had finally learned where the viewer was.